Good. Okay, great. Yes, well, happy Friday, everyone. We finally made it, the end of the week. You know, it's been a bit of a heavy and hectic week, but yeah, we made it. Yeah, for today, this is a part of the RBT curriculum. I didn't think this was going to be on the task list, but it is. I'm actually pleasantly surprised this is going to be covered, considering how verbal behavior is legitimately one of my favorite things to talk about and think about. I kid you not, I'm subscribed to the verbal behavior journal, and whenever I get an alert in my email that a new issue has popped up, it's almost like Christmas morning for me, because I get to see all the new research that has come up in this field of verbal behavior. So let's take a look, and I know I'm going to be throwing off a lot of really weird terms at you, but I think by now, you guys have kind of gotten used to it. Yeah, and it works out perfectly now. That we already talked about motivating operations, differential reinforcement, extinction, stimulus control. All that is going to really help in applying that to verbal behavior. So let's take a look as to what that entails. The reason why this may come across as a bit intimidating, I know it was certainly intimidating for me, is we're thinking of communication in terms of behavior. Communicating to communicate is to behave in such a way that leads to reinforcement being delivered, so that is socially mediated. So whenever we're thinking about verbal behavior, it's this paradigm that you look and you analyze how language is used in order to derive certain forms of reinforcement. And when we're thinking about language, we think about the individual units as words, sentences, phrases. But when we're getting down to the individual units of verbal behavior, we look at them through what is referred to as a verbal operant. Now, the word operant is something we've already been implicitly talking about this whole time. Operant behavior is simply behavior done for particular consequences, or that is a particular reinforcer, a generalized reinforcer such as praise or access to something. It is all behavior done for a specific consequence. Again, we're thinking in terms of function, we're thinking in terms of ABC, so it shouldn't be anything too outlandish for us. Now, this is one of the points that I think is so crucial whenever we're thinking about behavior, not just in terms of verbal behavior, but just everything that we've been discussing up until now. Function is going to be much more important than the form. So the reason why behavior is occurring is much more important than what it looks like. If you guys recall a few weeks back, we looked at that one example where the client was engaging in loud vocalizations, and then we looked at how each one of those functions could serve for that particular behavior. If you guys, think about the example, it was during bingo time, and the client was yelling out. Why could he have done that? It could have been for attention. It could have been because he saw something that he wanted, i.e. the prize. It could have been because he wanted to escape. He didn't enjoy bingo. Or it could just be a form of vocal stimulation. Same behavior, but different reasons behind it. And it's going to be the exact same case when we're talking about verbal behavior. So we're talking about the form. This is simply what the behavior looks like, the form of communication, what it entails. It could be vocal, just as we're doing right now. It could be using signs, a speech generative, getting something out. All that is verbal behavior. And we're going to be looking at the specific types of functions it may serve. And it's really important, again, to differentiate the functions, looking them at the lens of a verbal operant. The same word can be said, but have a different meaning, a different purpose behind it. In this instance, an individual could say water because they want some water, they're requesting it, or they simply see water and just want to say or label it. let's get into those verbal operants here. Again, take-home message, function is king. Function is the most important thing when it comes to behavior. Just as we look at the individual's clients, look at their behavior through the lens of the ABC, exact same things can apply to verbal behavior. When somebody says something, there can be a clear antecedent. So the thing that happens before the response itself is the verbal response. And then the consequences typically lead to some form of reinforcement derived. And if we recall the principles of reinforcement, when a particular behavior is reinforced, it's increased in likelihood to occur in the future. Classic example, client says cookie, you give them a cookie, they're much more likely to say cookie in the future. In this case, it would be water. So we would say that the antecedent is a state of thirst or water deprivation, to be a little bit more technical. They say water, and then they receive water. So now that behavior of saying water has been reinforced. When we talk about separate instances of verbal behavior, or what are commonly referred to as verbal episodes, it can be seen as an exchange between the speaker and the listener. Now, by definition, an instance of verbal behavior requires the social mediation or somebody else to provide the reinforcements. An individual is not going to say something in the absence of anybody else for a particular reinforcer if there's nobody to deliver it. If you can think of somebody being alone in the room, them saying water, well, that's not going to be a request because there's nobody to give them that water. However, we can talk about instances where the same individual can serve as their own speaker and respond to themselves as a listener, but no need to get into that. So the speaker is the one who emits the verbal operant, and then the listener is the one who provides the reinforcements. That is the most important thing to stress here. So in our setting, in the context of the ISP goals and the VIP goals, clients are going to typically be the speakers in these verbal episodes. And then we are typically going to be the listeners. We're going to be the ones to respond to their verbal operants. So making requests, the counting goals, labeling, all that in order to be reinforced requires us to be the ones to reinforce it by delivering the specific or generalized reinforcement that it needs. You guys with me so far? Listener, speaker, function, form, yeah. Okay, now we can look at the individual verbal operants. So there are going to be 5 we're looking at in particular. And these 5 essentially can encapsulate each unit of communication that we look at when it comes to verbal behavior. So think of these as individual units of language, words, sentences, phrases. That is how we want to think about the verbal operants. So the most basic, I would say, is demand. So whenever you hear me saying man when I want to mean request, is because I'm so used to, I've been so conditioned and reinforced by saying man that it just become a force of habit. Yeah, a man, best way to think about it is a request. And when somebody wants to request something, typically there's a motivating operation behind it. They want something, they desire something. They're in a state of deprivation for it. So the value of engaging the behavior to get it is increased. So when we think of MAD, we want to think motivation, there's an MO in place. And of course, whenever we're talking about self-advocacy goals or functional communication training, this is pretty much a staple of that, being able to have the client's demand. Are you able to see all right, Kirsty? Okay. They're saying you got a big head, Jonathan. Yeah. 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 Yeah, you can sit there, squeeze over. I mean, there's nobody in between James and Remy. Okay, so that is the man. Yeah, what makes the man unique compared to the other verbal operants is that it's reinforced by a specific reinforcer. So for instance, if the client says, I want cookie, it can only be reinforced by them getting the cookie. If they want water, then it's only going to be specifically water that is going to be reinforcing to that. Same thing with them asking for a break, to finish an activity, to go on a walk. All of those are separate instances of specific reinforcers that they want. And when they get those things, then the behavior is reinforced, and they're much more likely to engage in manding. So that's man. Now let's talk about tacting the tack. So this is our second verbal operant. And the technical definition for this one would be it having an antecedent of a non-verbal stimulus. So the individual sees something out in their environment, and then they vocalize or they emit a sign describing that thing, essentially labeling it. For instance, here I am, left to my own devices. I see a computer, so then I say, computer. I see my water bottle. You guys probably can't see it from there, but I see it, and I'm able to say, water. See, now I'll get to the video, but it's really important to develop somebody's tack repertoire to increase the amount of words that, let's say, are in their vocabulary. And in specific instances, you can see how relevant it would be for their well-being. The classic example that I like to look at is if an individual isn't able to tack their own body parts, then it'd be very difficult for them to be able to tell you when something feels wrong or when they're hurt somewhere. Once again, so let's take a look at tacting me and tail. Oh no, no closed sessions, but that's all right. Oh. Okay. Good. What's this? Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah, so if you guys didn't catch that, he was asking her, what is this? And she responded, egg. So there we can say that there was a bit of tact training. She sees the non-verbal stimulus, the egg, and then says egg in its presence. And he gives her the generalized reinforcement of, oh, good job. And then there were a few distractor trials sprinkled in there. So that is tacting. Now can discuss the echoic. This is our third verbal operant. And this has the antecedent of a verbal stimulus, and the response has a one-to-one correspondence with the antecedent. That is all to say that the verbal behavior that precedes the response is the exact same. So for instance, Jane Abel, if I can have you volunteer, okay, just say anything to me, anything at all, doesn't matter.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's nice outside.
It's nice outside.
I'm about to have dinner.
About to have dinner.
My dinner's gonna be delicious.
My dinner's gonna be delicious. Yes. that was an echoic episode because everything that I said in response had the exact same correspondence or the same form as her verbal behavior. And this is so critical in early development because the way children begin developing their own verbal behavior is by listening and repeating to the things that are said around them. Which is why it's so important to be able to talk to children, even if it doesn't seem like they're listening, they are, and they're picking up on all these separate instances of verbal behavior. So for instance, if you're just playing with a child, and then you tell them that something is a ball, all of a sudden, they start saying ball to themselves. Even if they're not doing so out loud, they are doing so in their head. And something else I do want to stress about the importance of recognizing each independent verbal operant is even if somebody is able to, let's say, engage in the echoic, they're able to repeat ball, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will request the ball or label it in the presence of a ball. And because you would think, oh, if somebody's able to say ball, they can say it in any other context. But when working with particular individuals with autism, that is not the case. And I actually encountered this for the first time back when I was working as an RBT. I was with this itty bitty guy. He's 2 years old. And he pretty much loved everything that had four wheels: cars, police cars, fire trucks. And his dad would play on the TV for him these flashcards of various automobiles. So whenever those would come on, he would say, oh, police car, fire truck. So, okay, cool. He's able to say it perfectly fine, beautifully intelligible. I mean, for a 2-year-old, he said it so clearly. But then when I'm playing with him during the session, I have his fire truck, and it looks like he wants it. He's reaching for it, but he's not requesting it. He's not demanding it. So you see how those are two different types of skills: to be able to label something, to be able to request it, and to repeat it. Which is why not only can they be interdependent, you can use them to teach other skills. But when there's a weakness in one, typically developing the other one doesn't necessarily lead to the acquisition of the man or the tact. So I think that's really important to stress whenever we think, okay, just because they can say it doesn't mean that they can say it or use it in a different function or a different sense. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Okay. This is the interverbal. This is probably the most complicated to teach. I believe this brings us to our fifth verbal operant. Unlike the echoic, the interverbal has a antecedent of somebody else's verbal behavior that does not have a one-to-one correspondence, which means the verbal behavior that precedes it is not the exact same as the response. So when we think about interverbals and the way we teach them, it's a bit hidden than demand. Demand somebody for something. For instance, that young child, since he really wanted a car or the fire truck, I prompted him to request the fire truck, and then that's how he began using it as a command. Same thing with, let's say, some of the clients. They have desire for attention, so then we give them a functionally appropriate means of getting attention, and then that is how we can also consider that man training. Interverbals, they require a repertoire or a collection of both requests and tacting. So they need to be able to label things, because if you even look at what an interverbal would entail, it means that they have to be able to respond appropriately given the context.
From CA.RBT.
So for instance, if you ask somebody what they're going to do this weekend, the way they respond is, oh, I'm going to go to the park. See, those two responses do not look similar. And typically the best way I understand or think about interverbals are questions. What, where, why, how. all those are going to be different than the answer. Even these fill in the blanks where you tell somebody ready, set, then blank, they say something.
Mhm.
Then of course answering how are you and responding with fine.
They said it talks directly in the mic certificate.
Really fun way to teach interverbals
I hope that
is with music.
It doesn't really
I wonder what you're there.
Sorry guys, I skipped it. Ah. There you go.
Which one do you want to work for?
Mhm.
Your
Yeah,
water,
the-
good
the-
choice. This one. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Yes, the star. How I wonder what you're. There's your water. Nice job, Sam.
So you see the twinkle, twinkle, did not have one-to-one, point-to-point correspondence with the response.
So, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then I included there on your handout a table of going over what are the controlling variables for the various operands. So as you see with the MAD, it's the MO, wanting something, desiring something. The TAC is seeing a nonverbal stimulus. Echoic, hearing somebody. And then the interverbal is responding to somebody's comment or question. And then with the demand, in order to be reinforced, it requires a specific reinforcer. So in the example of the table, that is the delivery of the snack. And then for all the others, it's usually in the form of social praise or continuing the verbal episode. So for instance, in a interverbal, the reinforcement for, let's say, a conversation is keeping the conversation going. Okay, any questions regarding any of the verbal operands? So I think I have some questions here. Oh, not yet. Okay. And we could probably spend a good while talking about the various procedures using the verbal operands when it comes to teaching clients how to communicate. Some of that is unfortunately going to have to take a back seat until we get through all of the training, RBT training. So look forward to that. But at least for now, here are some useful things to keep in mind. And some of these best practices and advices for implementation are usually the exact same as some of the ones we've discussed previously. We got to recognize what the function is, especially when it comes to a verbal response that is could be interpreted as a command or attack. So recognizing when somebody's making a request and when they're simply saying or labeling something. In the case of the bathroom, I think it'll help us recognize that. And then just like when we talked about MOs, capturing the motivation for a reinforcer to implement man training is usually the way to go. Yes, generalized. And I think there could be nothing more generalizable, more easier to teach naturally than verbal behavior. Because we're essentially using everyday interactions already. And I would even go as far to say you would have to put a lot more effort at contriving these things than to simply let them occur naturally. So for instance, whenever I'm working, when I get the opportunity to work directly with a client, I just let them take the reins and kind of just go from there, using these opportunities for them to work on answering questions. So there's my interverbals, getting them to make requests appropriately. That's demands. And then just randomly asking, oh, hey, what's that? For them to work on their tacting repertoire. Then I did, since we do have a bit of time before the questions, I did want to share a quick A quick video. Well, it's going to be a part of video of something that is referred to as a echoic to manned transfer. So this is using somebody's echoic repertoire, typically an individual with echolalia. I think there may have been just a handful of clients here that may have had something like this, where if you say something, chances are they're going to emit an echoic. They're just going to repeat right back what you say. And traditionally, this has been very tricky to get them to say anything else, because they've just been getting by their entire lives by simply repeating everything that they hear. It's a double-edged sword, though. We can use that in order for them to learn to command independently. And Dr. McGreevy here demonstrates how he approaches it. And I've actually adopted this exact same procedure with one of the clients at the care home who, yeah, incredibly echolalic. He would repeat everything you say right back to him. Because I kid you not, you ask him, hey, how are you doing? Hey, how are you doing? And then you wouldn't get anything else from him. We're able to have some success with using a procedure like this.
Does this differently than I do it. Okay, so you want me to show you, like this time I'll be the teacher and you be the student. See? Here's the way I would do it. And you just respond echoically. Water.
Water.
And then I would fade it the next time back. Water.
Water.
Okay. And then I'd keep coming back, and this time I go
Water.
like that. If I could get it. This is the way I do it. That's not the way Mark did it. Let me see if I can remember exactly the way Mark did it. You ready? All right. Water.
Water. Water.
That's how Mark did it. And neither one of us knew that. We didn't know that we do it differently.
He's referring to Mark Sundberg, who was a pioneer in verbal behavior. Yeah, as you guys notice, he used some of the same procedures and techniques that we have described earlier with that time delay, giving the clients the opportunity to respond before providing a prompt. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the questions? Oh, this will be a really fun tidbit for you guys. Any question is essentially a man, because you are asking it with the motivation to get an answer. And the answer is a specific reinforcer for asking a question. So intrinsically, every single question is a man. But from the listener's point of view, it's an interverbal, because the response is going to be different than the question. And yeah, these things are just so interdependent and also intermingled. It's so cool. But at any rate, a client is sitting at the lunch table and sees a peer eating a bag of chips. The client points to the chips and says, chips. You give the client a small handful of chips. Which verbal operant is this?
A.
I hear A, I hear B. Great, I completely understand where you're coming from. Yes. In this instance, there is the desire for chips. Yeah, she's asking for the chips. Yeah, so the motivation to get the chips is there. Exactly. Yeah, it's not like she sees the presence of the chips, because I've seen her at times where there are no chips around and then she still asks for them. So we can say that the desire or the motivation to get chips is there. Awesome. During the community outing, a client looks out the window and sees a red truck and says, fire truck. You respond, that's right, that is a big fire truck. Which operant is this? Yes, tack. Fire truck is a nonverbal stimulus, and they say fire truck, and they get praise for it. So therefore, it's attacked. You say to the client, it is time to go, and the client finishes the sentence by saying, the van. Which operant is this? I think I heard it. Danny saying D. Everybody else agree? Yes, interverbal. There is no one-to-one correspondence with the verbal stimulus and the response. We're teaching a client a new sign. You sign help and say sign help. The client then mirrors the help sign. Which operand is this? C. I hear C. C is right. Yes. Now, technically, an echoic is a type of operand also referred to as a duplex. And a duplex is the one that stresses that there's a one-to-one correspondence between the antecedent and the response. When we're teaching, let's say, signs, that would be a form of motor imitation. Because with echoics, it's vocally, but with signs, it's motor. And you can even extend this to copy and text. Those three instances, the echoic, motor imitation, and copy and text, are duplex. But for the sake of simplicity, it's an echoic. Which verbal operand is primarily controlled by an MO, such as hunger, thirst, or need for a break? I'm hearing B all around, and it is right. Yes, demand. And in most verbal behavior programs, demand is the easiest to teach because you just wait for somebody to want something, and then you go from there. A client enters the room in the morning. You ask, "How was your weekend?" The client replies, "I went to the park." Which operand is this? Here, D.
D.
Yes, D all around. It's the interverbal. If a client says water because they're thirsty, it's a man. But if they say water because they see a bottle of water on the desk, what is it then? Yes, it's attack. Very good. The client is using PECs. They see a picture of a cat in a book and they hand you the cat icon. You say, yes, that is a cat. Which is the verbal operand here? Okay, I'm hearing A. I'm hearing C. Let's take a look. It is attack. Yeah, it is not equipped because there is not a one-to-one correspondence between the icon of the cat and then you saying, yes, that's a cat. Those are different forms. And we got to keep in mind that the antecedent is that nonverbal stimulus of the image of the cat. So this is a bit more of an instance of them labeling than requesting, let's say, for a cat, which good luck delivering that if there's not a cat around. A client had just finished their lunch and are no longer hungry. They then see a peer eating a cookie, but then the client says cookie. Which operand is this? You gotta pick one. Yeah, you gotta pick one.
A.
Okay, then he's saying A. Does anybody think it's B?
B.
It is A. Yes, nice one, A. Yes, this is a tricky one. There is no MO for food. They don't want food because it says that they just finished their lunch and they're not hungry. So they are not in deprivative state for food. Therefore, the food is not reinforcing to them. And it's just them simply saying, oh yeah, that's a cookie. But the cookie, good, yes. I was trying to be a little bit tricky there. Yeah, awesome. And I believe this is the last one. Oh, this is a fun one. While sitting down across from the client, you say mesa. The client then says table. Which operand is this?
C.
So I'm hearing C, hearing D. Let's see. Interverbal. Yes. No, see, I meant to be tricky here. Yes. There is not a one-to-one correspondence between mesa and table, despite them meaning the same thing. The words themselves don't resemble one another. Even though they mean the same thing, in terms of operant behavior, they are interverbal. They do not resemble each other, so then it is interverbal. Yes, I was trying to be tricky there. Don't you feel bad about that, Eddie? Awesome. Yeah. Any questions in regards to verbal behavior? So I did throw a lot at you guys, and I've been throwing a lot at you these past couple of days, so I really appreciate all of your cooperation. Yeah, and like I said, hopefully once we're all done with the RBT training, we can possibly go over some of these procedures to see if we can help the clients better communicate with what's already out inside their ISP and VIPs. Well, with that being said, I hope all of you guys have a great weekend, and yeah, see you Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.